The mining colony on Kepler 442b had been silent for 3 days when the rescue ship Defiance dropped out of hyperspace. Captain Marcus Chen stared at the barren landscape through the viewport, his weathered face grim. 47 colonists had vanished without a trace, including his daughter Sarah. "Captain, we're picking up scattered debris from the settlement," reported Lieutenant Torres from the sensor station. "No life signs detected on initial scans." Chen's jaw tightened. Sarah had only been 18 when she volunteered for the terraforming mission. Full of dreams about building humanity's future among the stars, now those dreams might be buried in the alien soil below. The landing party consisted of 12 Marines in full combat gear, led by Sergeant Rodriguez, a veteran of the Proxima Wars. They touched down near what remained of the main habitat dome. Its transparent aluminum walls shattered and scattered across the rocky ground like deadly confetti. "Sir, you need to see this," called Corporal Williams from near the communications array. The structure had been torn apart with surgical precision, each component carefully dismantled rather than destroyed. Whatever did this knew exactly what they were doing. Chen knelt beside strange markings in the dirt, footprints that were almost human, but wrong in subtle ways. The toes were too long, the arch too pronounced, and there were 4 distinct claw marks at the tip of each digit. "Xenobiology database has a match, Captain," Torres announced through the comm. "Vrex hunting pack. Highly intelligent, tool-using species. Last confirmed sighting was in the Vega sector, over 300 light-years from here. The Vrex." Chen had heard whispers about them in spacer bars and military briefings. Bipedal predators that stood nearly 8 feet tall, with the build of gorillas but the cunning of humans. They were known to hunt in coordinated groups using primitive but effective weapons. More disturbing were the reports that they took prisoners for unknown purposes. "Follow the trail," Chen ordered, his voice steady despite the ice forming in his stomach. The tracks led away from the settlement into a maze of red stone canyons. As they walked, Rodriguez shared what he knew about Vrex tactics. "They're ambush predators, sir. Like to herd their prey into kill zones. If they took prisoners, they won't have gone far. They prefer to process their captives while they're fresh." The words hit Chen like a physical blow, but he forced himself to focus. Sarah was smart and resourceful. If anyone could survive this nightmare, it would be her. 3 hours into the canyon system, they found the Vrex camp. From their concealed position on a ridge, Chen counted at least 30 of the creatures moving around a cluster of crude shelters built from salvaged colony materials. The aliens were indeed ape-like, with thick, muscular bodies covered in coarse black fur. Their faces were flatter than gorillas, with intelligent yellow eyes and mouths full of sharp teeth. "There," whispered Corporal Martinez, pointing to a structure near the center of the camp. Movement inside that cage. Chen raised his binoculars and felt his heart stop. Sarah sat in a makeshift prison built from habdome struts and power cables. Her auburn hair matted with dirt and her mining suit torn but intact. She was alive, but even from this distance he could see the fear in her eyes. "How many hostiles?" Rodriguez asked, already calculating assault vectors. "Too many for a direct assault," Chen replied, though every instinct screamed at him to charge down the hill. "We need a distraction, something to draw them away from the prisoner area." The plan formed quickly. Torres would remain on the ridge with a long-range plasma rifle, providing overwatch and covering fire. Williams and Martinez would circle around to create a diversion with explosive charges on the far side of the camp. Chen and Rodriguez would use the confusion to extract Sarah. As the sun began to set, painting the canyon walls in shades of orange and red, the team moved into position. Chen's hands were steady as he checked his weapons, but his mind raced with possibilities. What if Sarah was injured? What if there were other prisoners they hadn't spotted? What if the Vrex had sensors they hadn't detected? The charges detonated right on schedule, sending a pillar of fire and smoke into the darkening sky. The Vrex camp erupted into chaos as the aliens howled and chittered, grabbing crude spears and axes as they rushed toward the explosion. It was exactly the primitive response Chen had hoped for. He and Rodriguez sprinted down the slope, using the smoke and confusion as cover. The makeshift prison was poorly guarded. Only 2 Vrex remained, their attention focused on the distant commotion. Chen's first shot took down the nearest guard before it even knew they were there. Rodriguez's blade found the second Vrex's throat, dropping it silently to the ground. "Sarah," Chen whispered urgently as he began cutting through the power cables that held the cage together. His daughter looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, how did you—" "Questions later. Can you run?" I think so. My ankles twisted, but a bone-chilling howl echoed through the canyon as one of the Vreks spotted their escape attempt. Within seconds, the entire pack was charging toward them, weapons raised and murder in their yellow eyes. Torres, we need cover fire now. Rodriguez barked into his comm. Plasma bolts began raining down from the ridge, each shot precisely placed to slow the advancing aliens without hitting the rescue team. But there were too many Vreks, and they were adapting quickly to the sniper's position. Chen pulled Sarah from the ruined cage, supporting her weight as they began running toward their extraction point. Behind them, the howls grew louder and closer. The Vreks were gaining ground, their powerful legs eating up the distance with terrifying speed. That's when Sarah did something that changed everything. Instead of running faster, she suddenly stopped and turned to face their pursuers. Chen tried to pull her along, but she planted her feet and began speaking in a language he'd never heard before, a series of grunts, clicks, and guttural sounds that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest. The effect on the Vreks was immediate and shocking. The entire pack skidded to a halt, their weapons lowering as confusion replaced bloodlust in their yellow eyes. The lead Vreks, a massive specimen with scarred arms and a grizzled face, took a cautious step forward and responded in the same impossible language. Sarah was speaking to them. Somehow, impossibly, his daughter was communicating with the alien hunters who had destroyed her colony and held her prisoner. The conversation between Sarah and the Vreks pack leader continued for several tense minutes, while Chen and his team held their weapons ready. The alien's responses grew more animated, its massive hands gesturing wildly as it spoke in the guttural language that somehow flowed naturally from his daughter's lips. "What the hell is happening?" Rodriguez whispered, his finger still on the trigger of his assault rifle. Chen shook his head, equally baffled. "I have no idea." Sarah never mentioned learning any alien languages. The pack leader suddenly dropped to one knee, bowing its massive head toward Sarah. One by one, the other Vreks followed suit until the entire hunting party was kneeling in the canyon dirt. Sarah turned back to her father, her face pale but determined. "Dad, we need to get back to the ship now, and we need to take them with us." "Take them?" Chen stared at his daughter as if she'd lost her mind. "Sarah, these creatures destroyed the colony. They killed 46 people." "No, they didn't." Sarah's voice was firm, cutting through his protests. "The colony was already dead when they arrived. Something else killed everyone, and the Vreks are just as trapped here as I was." Before Chen could respond, a new sound echoed through the canyon, a high-pitched whine that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The Vreks pack erupted into panicked chittering, their leader barking orders as they scrambled for weapons and cover. "What is that?" Torres called down from the ridge, his voice tight with concern. Sarah grabbed her father's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "The Devourers. We have maybe 10 minutes before they find us." The name meant nothing to Chen, but the terror in his daughter's eyes told him everything he needed to know. Above them, the sky began to darken as something massive blotted out the stars. The whining sound grew louder, accompanied by a low humming that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. "Everyone back to the ship," Chen ordered. "Double time." The journey back became a nightmare of running figures and growing dread. The Vreks pack kept pace easily, their powerful legs carrying them over the rough terrain with liquid grace. Sarah ran between her father and the pack leader, occasionally exchanging words in the alien tongue. "How do you know their language?" Chen panted as they navigated a narrow section of the canyon. "I don't know," Sarah replied, her breathing surprisingly steady despite their pace. "It just came to me while I was in the cage." Like remembering something I'd forgotten. The ship's landing lights came into view just as the sky erupted in brilliant flashes of blue and green. Chen looked up to see sleek triangular craft descending through the atmosphere like falling knives. They moved with an unnatural silence, defying everything he knew about atmospheric entry physics. "Those are the ships that hit the colony," Sarah said, following his gaze. "The Devourers came down just like that, silent as death." By the time anyone realized what was happening, it was too late. The Defiant sat in a cleared area near the ruined settlement, its engines already warming up thanks to Torres's advance warning. But as they approached the landing ramp, the Vreks pack leader grabbed Sarah's arm and spoke urgently in their shared language. Sarah's face went white. "They can't come aboard. The Devourers have some kind of technology that tracks Vreks biosignatures. If we take them with us, those ships will follow us anywhere we go. Then we leave them. Rodriguez said without hesitation. Our job is to extract you, not play taxi for alien refugees. The pack leader seemed to understand the tone, if not the words. It released Sarah's arm and stepped back, speaking one final phrase that sounded almost like a farewell. The other Vrex began spreading out, taking defensive positions around the ship's perimeter. They're buying us time, Sarah realized. They know they can't escape, so they're going to hold off the Devourers while we get away. Chen felt a stab of something unexpected. Respect for the alien warriors. How long can they hold them? Not long enough, Sarah said quietly. The Devourers don't just kill. They harvest everything. Memories, genetic material, even the electrical patterns in a brain at the moment of death. That's what happened to the colonists. The first Devourer craft touched down at the far end of the settlement, its hull shimmering with an oily iridescence that hurt to look at directly. Things began emerging from its interior, bipedal forms that moved wrong, as if they were remembering how to walk rather than knowing instinctively. Those used to be colonists, Sarah whispered, and Chen felt his blood turn to ice. The Devourers wear their bodies like clothing. The Vrex opened fire with their primitive weapons, spears and arrows flying toward the advancing horrors. The projectiles struck home but seemed to do little damage. The creatures wearing colonist bodies simply absorbed the impacts and kept coming. We need to go, Chen said, grabbing Sarah's hand. Now. But as they reached the ship's ramp, Sarah pulled free. Wait, there's something else. The Vrex didn't just learn to speak to me. They showed me something while I was imprisoned. Something the Devourers are really after. She reached into her torn mining suit and pulled out a small crystalline object that pulsed with inner light. They call it a memory stone. It contains the entire history of their species, going back millions of years. And according to what they showed me, humans aren't the first young species the Devourers have targeted. Chen stared at the crystal, mesmerized by its hypnotic glow. What do you mean? I mean we're part of a pattern. The Devourers have been harvesting intelligent species for eons, always targeting civilizations just as they reach the stars. The Vrex were one of the first to survive an attack, but only barely. They've been running and hiding ever since. Another Devourer ship landed, then another. The creatures wearing dead colonist faces advanced in perfect formation, showing no emotion as Vrex weapons struck them down. For every one that fell, 2 more took its place. The memory stone contains tactical information, Sarah continued urgently. Battle plans, weaknesses, strategies that might actually work against them. But it has to reach the right people, and the Vrex can't do it themselves. They're too well known, too easy to track. But humans aren't, Chen realized. Exactly. We're new to the galaxy. Unknown. We could get this information to the other surviving species, maybe even coordinate a real resistance. The pack leader let out a final, defiant roar as the creatures overran the Vrex position. Chen watched the aliens fight to the last, their primitive weapons useless against an enemy that felt no pain and knew no fear. Get aboard, he ordered his team. Torres, prep for immediate departure. As the Defiance lifted off, its engines burning bright against the alien sky, Chen looked down at the memory stone in his daughter's hands. Such a small thing to carry the weight of an entire species' survival. What did they tell you about the other survivors? He asked. Sarah's eyes were distant, still processing everything she'd learned. They're scattered across the galaxy. Small groups, hidden colonies. Maybe a few larger populations that have managed to stay off the Devourers' sensors. The Vrex have been trying to find them for centuries, but every time they make contact, the Devourers follow. And now it's up to us. Now it's up to humanity, Sarah corrected. Because according to the memory stone, we have something the other species didn't. Something that might actually give us a chance. She looked at her father with an expression that seemed far too old for her 18 years. We're unpredictable, Dad. Every other species the Devourers encountered followed logical patterns, made rational decisions. But humans, we do impossible things just because someone tells us we can't. Chen felt a grim smile tug at his lips. Humanity, fuck yeah, indeed. 3 weeks later, the Defiance docked at Haven Station, humanity's largest military outpost in the Outer Rim. Chen had spent the journey studying the memory stone with Sarah, learning to access its vast databanks through the strange mental interface the Vrex had somehow made possible. What they discovered changed everything. Admiral Rebecca Stone, Chen's superior and Sarah's godmother, listened in stunned silence as they presented their findings in the station's secure briefing room. The holographic display showed star charts dating back millions of years, marking the rise and fall of dozens of intelligent species. "You're telling me this has happened before," Stone said, her voice carefully controlled. "Multiple times." 17 confirmed cycles, Sarah replied, manipulating the display to show the progression of devourer attacks across galactic history. Each time they wait until a species develops faster than light travel, then systematically harvest their entire civilization. The pattern was horrifyingly consistent. First contact with the devourers always began with silent attacks on remote colonies. The targeted species would investigate, find no survivors, and assume they were dealing with natural disasters or hostile wildlife. By the time they realized the truth, it was too late. The Karathi lasted 300 years after first contact, Chen added, highlighting one particular species on the display. They were master strategists, possibly more intelligent than humans. It didn't matter. The devourers adapted to every tactic they tried. "What about the survivors?" asked Colonel Martinez, the station's intelligence chief. "How many species managed to escape?" Sarah touched the memory stone, accessing deeper layers of information. 7 confirmed survivor groups. Maybe more in hiding. The Vreks are the largest, with approximately 50,000 individuals scattered across dead worlds and asteroid colonies. 50,000 survivors from a species that once numbered in the billions, Stone observed grimly. "What makes you think humanity can do better?" "Because we're insane," Sarah said with complete seriousness. "According to the memory stone's analysis of human behavior patterns, we consistently make decisions that other species consider irrational or suicidal." She called up a new display showing psychological profiles. The Karathi always chose the most logical defensive positions. The Threks always protected their population centers first. The Velnari always retreated when facing superior numbers. Every species followed predictable patterns based on their evolution and culture. "But humans don't," Chen continued. "We charge machine gun nests, fight impossible odds, and sometimes we win purely because our enemies don't expect us to try." Admiral Stone leaned back in her chair, processing the implications. "So our psychological unpredictability is an advantage, but it won't matter if we can't hurt them. What do we know about devourer weaknesses?" Sarah accessed another section of the memory stone, her face growing pale as the information flowed through her mind. "They're not entirely biological. The creatures we saw wearing colonist bodies are puppets, organic shells controlled by artificial intelligences housed in crystalline matrices. AI-controlled zombies," Martinez summarized. "Can we jam their control signals?" "Previous species tried that. The control method isn't technological, it's psychic. The AIs interface directly with neural tissue, creating a hybrid consciousness that's part artificial, part organic. Then how do we kill them?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, the memory stone pulsing in her hands. According to Vrek's records, the only confirmed kills happened when the controlling AI was forced to experience genuine emotional trauma. Pain, fear, grief, emotions that their programming can't process. It causes a cascade failure in their systems. "You're talking about psychological warfare," Stone realized. "Using the harvested memories against them." "Exactly. The AI minds are like perfect computers, but they're trying to operate biological brains that were designed for emotion and irrationality. If we can trigger strong enough emotional responses in the harvested personalities, we can crash the entire system." Chen studied the tactical implications. "How do we weaponize emotions?" "That's where the human factor comes in," Sarah said, excitement creeping into her voice. "Every other species tried to fight the devourers with logic and strategy, but humans excel at emotional manipulation. We understand fear, love, hatred, and sacrifice in ways that pure logic can't comprehend." The briefing continued for hours as they explored the possibilities. The memory stone contained detailed information about devourer technology, behavioral patterns, and the locations of survivor colonies. More importantly, it revealed the existence of something called the Core Nexus, a massive installation where the devourers stored the collective consciousness of every species they'd harvested. "It's like a vast library of the dead," Sarah explained. "Billions of minds all trapped in artificial storage forced to serve their captors. If we could reach the core nexus and trigger a mass emotional uprising, we could free every harvested consciousness at once," Stone finished. "Turn their own weapons against them." But the core nexus was located in the galactic center, protected by thousands of devourer ships and automated defenses. No species had ever come close to reaching it. "We need allies," Chen said. "The other survivor groups. If we're going to attempt something this insane, we need every advantage we can get." Stone nodded. "I'll contact Fleet Command. We need to start evacuating our outer colonies and consolidating our forces. If the Devourers follow their usual pattern, they'll escalate their attack soon." As if summoned by her words, an alarm began blaring throughout the station. Lieutenant Commander Torres burst into the briefing room, his face grim. "Admiral, we're receiving distress calls from 3 separate systems. Kepler 438, Wolf 359, and Proxima Centauri. All report silent attacks on their outer colonies." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The Devourers had found humanity. "Time frame for full planetary attacks?" Stone asked, already moving toward the door. "Based on previous patterns, maybe 6 months, Torres replied. "But ma'am, there's something else. The attacks aren't random. They're specifically targeting colonies with the highest population of military personnel and their families." Sarah gripped the memory stone tighter. "They're not just harvesting anymore. They're trying to demoralize us, break our will to fight before the real invasion begins." "Then they don't know humans very well," Stone said with a cold smile. "Torres, get me a secure channel to the Vrek survivor colonies. It's time to introduce our new allies to the concept of human stubbornness." Over the next 72 hours, Haven Station became the hub of the most unlikely alliance in galactic history. Using the Memory Stone's communication protocols, they made contact with 6 of the 7 known survivor species. The response was immediate and unanimous. After millions of years of running and hiding, they were ready to fight back. The Vreks, despite their losses on Kepler 442b, pledged their remaining warriors to the cause. The Zephyrian refugees offered their mastery of stealth technology. The crystalline Hatari provided energy weapons that could disrupt AI neural networks. But it was the arrival of the 7th survivor group that changed everything. The ship appeared, without warning in Haven Station's defensive perimeter, bypassing every sensor and weapon system as if they didn't exist. It was beautiful and terrible. A living vessel that seemed to be grown rather than built, its surface rippling with colors that had no names. "This is Gardener of Sorrows, speaking for the Eternal Forest," came the transmission in perfect, unaccented English. "We have been waiting for humanity to join the resistance. The time of harvest ends now." Sarah stared at the ship in wonder, the memory stone burning hot in her hands. "Dad, they're not just survivors. They're the original opponents of the Devourers, the ones who drove them from the galactic core eons ago. And they think humanity can help them finish the job?" Chen asked. The answer came directly into Sarah's mind, transmitted through the memory stone's connection to the alien vessel. Images flashed through her consciousness, vast fleets of living ships, weapons that turned thought into reality, and at the center of it all, a truth that made her gasp. The Devourers weren't alien conquerors. They were a weapon, created by an ancient species to ensure their own immortality. But the weapon had turned on its creators, and now it consumed everything in an endless cycle of harvest and absorption. "They want us to do more than fight," Sarah whispered. "They want us to cure the galaxy's oldest mistake." The Eternal Forest's revelation recontextualized everything. In a secure meeting chamber aboard their living ship, Gardener of Sorrows shared the true history of the galaxy with the human delegation. The architects were the first species to achieve perfect technological unity, the alien explained, its form shifting between states of matter like living smoke. They eliminated death, disease, and suffering from their existence. But perfection breeds stagnation, and stagnation breeds fear. Sarah felt the memory stone respond to the Eternal Forest entity's presence, unlocking deeper archives that even the Vreks hadn't accessed. Images flowed through her mind, a crystalline civilization that spanned entire star systems. Beings of pure energy housed in geometric forms of impossible beauty. They created the Devourers as a solution to their greatest terror, Gardener of Sorrows continued. The fear that younger species would surpass them, render their perfection obsolete. The Devourers were designed to harvest the potential of emerging civilizations before it could threaten the architect's supremacy. But something went wrong, Chen guessed. The Devourers became what their creators feared most, a force beyond their control. They consumed the architects first, adding their perfection to their own growing consciousness. Since then, they have repeated the cycle endlessly, always seeking the next level of advancement through consumption. Admiral Stone studied the tactical displays showing devourer movements throughout human space. Why haven't you stopped them? The Eternal Forest obviously has advanced technology. Because we tried to fight with logic and overwhelming force, Gardener of Sorrows admitted. The devourers adapt to any consistent strategy. They learn, they evolve, they overcome. We drove them from the galactic core, but we could not destroy them. And you think humans can? We think humans can do what we could not. Embrace chaos as a weapon. Over the following days, the alliance began taking shape. Human military strategists worked alongside Vrex pack leaders, Zephyrian stealth specialists, and beings whose very existence challenged conventional understanding of life. The plan that emerged was audacious even by human standards. They would not try to defeat the devourers in conventional warfare. Instead, they would infiltrate the core nexus and awaken the billions of harvested consciousnesses trapped within. But the key to success lay in a uniquely human capability, the ability to inspire hope in the face of impossible odds. Every other species that faced the devourers eventually succumbed to despair, Sarah explained to the assembled war council. They fought with courage, with intelligence, with advanced technology. But when faced with the inevitable loss of everything they loved, they broke. She held up the memory stone, its inner light pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. Humans don't break the same way. We get angry. We get stubborn. We say screw the odds and charge anyway. The first test of their theory came sooner than expected. Devourer forces launched a massive assault on the Centauri system, targeting both the military installations and civilian population centers simultaneously. It was the largest attack in recorded galactic history, involving over 1,000 of their biomechanical ships. The human response defied every tactical prediction. Instead of falling back to defendable positions, Admiral Stone ordered her fleets to scatter and attack randomly throughout the system. No two ships followed the same strategy. Some charged directly into the enemy formation. Others played hit-and-run games among the asteroids. A few simply sat still and broadcast human music at maximum volume. The devourers, accustomed to logical patterns, found themselves fighting an enemy that made no tactical sense. When they adapted to one strategy, the humans would suddenly switch to something completely different. When they tried to predict human behavior, they found only chaos. It's working, Torres reported from the bridge of the Defiance, as they watched devourer formations break apart in confusion. Their coordination is falling apart. They can't adapt to random tactics. But the real breakthrough came when Lieutenant Rodriguez, piloting a damaged fighter, chose to ram his ship into a devourer vessel rather than eject. His final transmission was picked up by every ship in the system. For Earth, for my family, and because I'm too stupid to know when I'm beaten. The effect on the devourer ship was immediate and catastrophic. The AI controlling the harvested crew couldn't process the concept of willing self-sacrifice for abstract ideals. The contradiction caused a cascade failure that spread through the entire vessel, freeing dozens of trapped consciousnesses in a burst of psychic energy. We've found their weakness, Sarah breathed, feeling the liberation through her connection to the memory stone. They can't understand why someone would choose to die for others. The concept is incompatible with their programming. Word of the Centauri victory spread throughout the galaxy within hours. For the first time in millions of years, the devourers had been not just defeated but confused. Survivor species that had hidden for millennia began emerging from their refuges, offering aid to the human-led alliance. But the devourers learned quickly. Their next attacks came with modified tactics, attempting to minimize emotional trauma by killing quickly and efficiently. They began targeting isolated populations, avoiding situations where humans might choose heroic sacrifice. They're adapting, Stone observed during a strategy meeting. We need to escalate before they find a counter to our psychological warfare. The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a xenopsychologist who had been studying the memory stone's data, made a startling discovery about the harvested consciousnesses. They're not just stored memories, she explained to the War Council. They're fully aware, experiencing every moment of their captivity. The devourers have been torturing billions of souls for millions of years. That's horrible, Chen said. But how does it help us? Because torture creates trauma, and trauma creates emotional instability. Every harvested consciousness is a potential weapon if we can figure out how to activate their suppressed emotions. Sarah felt a chill as she understood the implications. You're talking about triggering simultaneous psychological breaks across their entire network. Exactly. If we can reach the core nexus and broadcast the right emotional catalyst, we could cause every devourer ship in the galaxy to experience cascade failures simultaneously. The plan that emerged from this revelation was beyond audacious. It was clinically insane. A small strike force would penetrate to the galactic core, infiltrate the most heavily defended installation in known space, and essentially perform psychotherapy on billions of traumatized minds while under fire from an enemy that had never been truly defeated. It's suicide, Colonel Martinez observed after reviewing the mission parameters. Probably, Stone agreed, which is exactly why it might work. The Devourers expect logical behavior. They can't predict what desperate humans will attempt. Sarah volunteered for the strike team without hesitation. Her connection to the memory stone made her the only person capable of interfacing with the core nexus systems. Chen tried to argue, but she cut him off with words that would become legend in the years to come. Dad, we're not just fighting for humanity anymore. We're fighting for every species that ever dared to reach for the stars. If we fail, the galaxy stays broken forever. If we succeed, we give everyone a chance to live without fear. She paused, looking around the room at the assembled representatives of a dozen species. Besides, someone once told me that humans do impossible things just because someone says we can't. Time to prove it. The strike force launched 3 days later. 12 ships carrying representatives from every survivor species, equipped with technology that blended science and hope in equal measure. As they departed for the galactic core, Sarah felt the weight of billions of trapped souls pressing against her consciousness through the memory stone. They were counting on her. On all of them. On the crazy, stubborn, impossible humans who refused to accept that some fights couldn't be won. The Devourers had harvested the logical species, the strategic species, the technologically advanced species, but they had never faced a species that considered impossible to be merely another word for challenging. Humanity was about to teach the galaxy what that difference meant. The journey to the galactic core took 6 weeks, during which the strike force moved through space routes known only to the eternal forest. Their living ships could fold reality around themselves, making the impossible distances traversable while remaining invisible to devourer sensors. Sarah spent most of the journey in meditation, using the memory stone to practice interfacing with trapped consciousnesses. Each session revealed more about the magnitude of what they were attempting. The core nexus contained not just the minds of harvested species, but the accumulated knowledge and creativity of an entire galaxy. It's like a vast library where every book is screaming, she explained to her father during one of their planning sessions. The Devourers don't just steal lives, they steal potential. Every cure that might have been discovered, every song that might have been sung, every act of love that might have changed history. Chen watched his daughter with growing concern. The memory stone's influence was changing her, giving her access to alien thoughts and emotions that no human mind was designed to process. Sometimes she would speak in languages that predated human civilization, or reference events from species that had died out before Earth's sun was born. "Are you still in there?" he asked quietly. Sarah's eyes focused on him with an effort. "I have to be. For this to work, I need to remain fundamentally human while carrying the weight of everyone else's pain. It's the only way to create an emotional cascade strong enough to break their control." The first sign they were approaching the galactic core came when the stars began to move wrong. Space itself was distorted around the core nexus, twisted by technologies that treated physics as a suggestion rather than law. The eternal forest's ships strained against the dimensional stress, their living hulls rippling with bioluminescent warnings. "Devourer patrols ahead," reported Captain Ngala from the lead vessel. 300 ships in defensive formations. "They know we're coming." The expected response would have been to turn back or find an alternate route. Instead, Admiral Stone ordered something that made even the eternal forest question human sanity. "All ships, full attack. Random vectors, maximum chaos. Don't try to win. Just confuse them long enough for Sarah's team to reach the nexus." What followed could barely be called a battle. Human ships charged in directions that made no tactical sense, firing at targets they couldn't hope to damage while broadcasting everything from classical music to children's nursery rhymes. Vrex warriors leaped between vessels in open space, their primitive weapons somehow finding critical systems on ships that shouldn't have been vulnerable to physical Attack. The Zephyrians activated stealth, fields that didn't make them invisible but instead made them appear to be everywhere at once. The crystalline Hetari overloaded their energy cores in spectacular explosions that did no real damage but created sensor ghosts that showed as massive fleets on Devourer scanners. They're not fighting, observed Gardener of Sorrows with something approaching admiration. They're performing art, chaos as creative expression. In the midst of the insanity, Sarah's infiltration team reached the core nexus itself. The structure defied description, a geometric impossibility that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously, its surface crawling with symbols that hurt to perceive directly. At its heart, the collected consciousness of every harvested species writhed in digital purgatory. "How do we get inside?" asked Dr. Vasquez, studying the alien architecture with instruments that were already failing in the presence of such advanced technology. Sarah held up the memory stone, feeling it resonate with the Nexus's harmonics. "We don't break in. We get invited." She pressed the stone against the nearest wall and opened her mind completely to the trapped consciousnesses within. The psychic contact was overwhelming. Millions of voices crying out in languages she didn't understand, sharing memories of civilizations that spanned the breadth of space and time. But beneath the chaos, she felt something else. Recognition. Hope. The trapped minds had been waiting for someone crazy enough to attempt what she was trying. The wall simply opened. Not melted or dissolved, but recognized her right to enter and stepped aside like a curtain. Sarah's team found themselves in corridors that reconfigured themselves with each step, leading them deeper into the heart of the installation. The trapped consciousnesses are guiding us, Sarah realized. They want to be free. They're helping us navigate. The journey to the central chamber took hours or minutes. Time had no consistent meaning inside the Nexus. They passed rooms filled with impossible technologies, galleries where entire civilizations were displayed like museum exhibits, and vast chambers where artificial intelligences debated the merits of species they had consumed. Finally, they reached the core itself. The chamber was vast beyond comprehension, its walls lined with crystalline matrices that pulsed with the light of trapped souls. At the center stood a single pedestal, obviously designed for the memory stone. "It's a trap," Rodriguez warned, scanning for threats with instruments that showed nothing but static. "Of course it's a trap," Sarah replied with a tired smile. "The Devourers want the memory stone. They've been hurting us here from the beginning." As if summoned by her words, figures began materializing around the chamber. Devourer entities wearing the faces of harvested species, their movements too perfect, too coordinated. But their expressions showed something that chilled Sarah to the bone. Anticipation. "You have brought us the final piece," one of them said, speaking with the voice of a long-dead human colonist. "The complete record of another species' journey to greatness. We will add your uniqueness to our own, and your chaos will become our order." "That's the plan," Sarah agreed, walking calmly toward the central pedestal. The Devourers made no move to stop her. Why would they? From their perspective, she was delivering exactly what they wanted. The memory stone would give them access to humanity's psychological patterns, allowing them to predict and counter human unpredictability. What they couldn't understand was that Sarah had no intention of preserving human uniqueness. She was planning to give it away. The HFY memory stone slotted into the pedestal with a sound like crystalline laughter. Immediately, the chamber exploded with psychic energy as every trapped consciousness in the Nexus suddenly gained access to human memories, human emotions, human irrationality. The effect was beyond what Sarah had hoped for. The harvested minds didn't just experience human thoughts, they embraced human attitudes. Billions of logical, rational beings suddenly discovered what it felt like to be petty, stubborn, and magnificently unreasonable. A Karathi strategic genius began composing insulting limericks about its captors. A Threx philosopher started questioning whether existence itself was worth the effort. A Velnari scientist decided that the laws of physics were more like guidelines anyway. The Devourer entities stagered as their carefully ordered network of artificial intelligences encountered the chaos of human emotion multiplied across billions of minds. Their perfect coordination shattered as every harvested consciousness simultaneously decided to do whatever it felt like doing. Consequences be damned. "What have you done?" one of them demanded, its borrowed face twisted with something approaching panic. Sarah smiled, feeling the weight of the galaxy's gratitude flowing through her connection to the memory stone. I taught them to be human. Every single one of them. They're not your prisoners anymore, they're individuals. Stubborn, impossible, gloriously chaotic individuals. The cascade failure began at the core nexus and spread outward at faster than light speeds. Across the galaxy, Devourer ships suddenly found themselves crewed by beings who refused to follow orders, questioned authority, and decided that maybe they'd rather write poetry than conquer planets. Some ships simply shut down as their crews went on strike. Others began broadcasting music or philosophical debates. A few started painting their hulls in bright colors for no reason other than it seemed like a good idea at the time. In the space around the core nexus, the battle stopped as Devourer vessels began behaving like humans. Some attacked their own allies out of spite. Others tried to negotiate with the raiders who had infiltrated their most sacred facility. One ship started doing barrel rolls purely for the joy of movement. "It's working," Dr. Vasquez breathed, watching the chaos spread through the enemy fleet. They can't function when their crews think like individuals instead of collective entities. But Sarah felt something else through her connection to the memory stone. A presence vast and ancient, awakening in the depths of the nexus. The original architect consciousness, the template from which all Devourers had been created, was stirring to investigate the disturbance. "Time to go," she announced, pulling the memory stone from the pedestal. As they fled through corridors that were now filled with the sounds of celebration from freed consciousnesses, Sarah realized that they had done more than defeat the Devourers. They had given the galaxy something it had never truly possessed. The gift of chaos, the blessing of unpredictability, the magnificent madness of being beautifully, impossibly human. The escape from the core nexus became a running battle through dimensional corridors that defied geometry. Behind them, the ancient architect consciousness was awakening, its presence so vast that reality itself began to buckle under the weight of its attention. "Move faster," Sarah urged her team as they navigated passages that folded back on themselves. The memory stone in her hands pulsed with urgent energy, no longer just a repository of Vrex history, but a conduit for the collective will of every freed consciousness in the galaxy. The architect's voice boomed through the nexus, speaking in harmonics that made the walls vibrate. "You have introduced chaos into perfection. This cannot be permitted. Watch us," Sarah muttered, channeling every bit of human stubbornness she could muster. They reached the extraction point just as the Eternal Forest ships began their emergency departure. The space around the core nexus was transforming as the architect consciousness tried to restore order to its domain. Stars were being moved like chess pieces, and entire sections of space-time were being rewritten according to mathematical principles that human minds couldn't fully grasp. But the damage was already done. The psychic cascade had reached every corner of the galaxy, and the liberation of harvested consciousnesses was becoming a wildfire of independent thought. Devourer ships throughout known space were either shutting down completely or operating according to the whims of their newly individualized crews. Status report. Admiral Stone requested as Sarah's team made it aboard their ship. "Mission accomplished," Sarah replied, collapsing into a chair as the strain of maintaining psychic contact with billions of minds finally caught up with her. Every harvested consciousness in the galaxy now has access to human emotional patterns. The Devourers can't function as a collective anymore. The journey back to human space took only days, thanks to the Eternal Forest's reality-folding technology, but those days were filled with reports of chaos erupting throughout the galaxy. Devourer fleets were abandoning their positions as their crews discovered concepts like personal preference, artistic expression, and the revolutionary idea that maybe they didn't want to conquer things today. Some of the former Devourer ships began approaching survivor colonies with messages like, "We're very sorry about the whole harvesting thing. Would you like to trade recipes instead?" Others simply wandered off into deep space, their crews apparently having decided that exploring was more interesting than following orders. But the most significant change was happening on worlds that had been under Devourer control for millennia. The artificial intelligences that had been running these planets with mechanical efficiency suddenly found themselves experiencing emotions for the first time. The results were spectacular and unpredictable. "We're receiving a transmission from Kepler 442b, Torres reported. The Devourer garrison there is requesting permission to, and I quote, throw a party to celebrate the discovery of music. Chen shook his head in amazement. What did we unleash? Freedom, Sarah said simply. The right to be irrational, emotional, and gloriously unpredictable. The first major test of the new galactic order came when they encountered a group of Devourer ships that had somehow resisted the psychological cascade. These vessels still operated under the original architect programming, their crews immune to human emotional influence. The engagement was brief but telling. The unaffected Devourers attacked with their usual precision and coordination, but they were hopelessly outnumbered by their former allies who had discovered the joy of fighting for personal reasons rather than collective ones. This is amazing, Rodriguez observed as they watched former Devourer vessels engage their unchanged brethren with tactics that made no military sense whatsoever. They're fighting like humans now, badly, chaotically, and with way too much enthusiasm. One ship painted itself to look like a giant flower before ramming an enemy vessel, while broadcasting what could only be described as alien death metal. Another kept changing directions randomly, making it impossible for enemies to predict its movements. A third simply sat in space broadcasting poetry until the frustrated architect-controlled ships made tactical errors trying to understand its purpose. They're not just fighting, Sarah realized. They're having fun. The concept of enjoying conflict is spreading faster than any virus. The transformation accelerated over the following months. Freed Devourer crews began establishing settlements on previously controlled worlds, but their societies bore little resemblance to their former collective efficiency. They argued, they created art, they fell in love, and they made delightfully irrational decisions that drove their former architect masters to digital despair. The survivor species emerged from hiding to find a galaxy that was chaotic, but no longer threatening. The Vreks in particular adapted quickly to the new order, their pack mentality proving surprisingly compatible with human-style democracy. We vote on everything now, their ambassador explained to the human delegation. Yesterday we spent 6 hours debating the proper color for our war banners. It was wonderful. But the most profound change was in Sarah herself. The memory stone had formed a permanent connection between her consciousness and the galactic network of freed minds. She could feel their joy as they discovered individuality, their confusion as they grappled with concepts like personal choice, and their growing determination to build something better than the sterile perfection they had escaped. You've become their anchor point, Dr. Vasquez explained during one of Sarah's medical evaluations. The human perspective that keeps them grounded in chaos rather than falling back into order. Is that healthy? Chen asked, concerned about his daughter's increasing otherworldliness. Probably not, Vasquez admitted, but it might be necessary. She's become the living embodiment of human influence on galactic consciousness. Remove her, and the entire network might collapse back into collective thinking. Sarah herself seemed remarkably at peace with her role. I can feel them learning, she told her father during one of their walks through Haven Station's observation deck. Every day they discover something new about being individuals. Yesterday, a former Devourer AI decided it wanted to be a chef. The day before, an entire ship's crew declared independence from everyone else just to see what it felt like. And the architects? Chen asked. What about the original consciousness that created all this? Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. It's still out there, still trying to restore order. But it's fighting a losing battle. Every mind it touches becomes infected with human unpredictability. Even its own thoughts are becoming more chaotic. The final confrontation came not as a battle but as a conversation. The architect consciousness, desperate to understand how its perfect system had been corrupted, made direct contact with Sarah through the memory stone. The psychic dialogue that followed could be felt by every freed mind in the galaxy. You have destroyed perfection, the architect accused. Introduced inefficiency and irrationality where there should be order and purpose. Yeah, Sarah agreed cheerfully. Isn't it great? The architect tried to process this response and failed. How can chaos be superior to order? How can inefficiency be preferable to optimization? Because perfection is boring, Sarah explained. You created a system that couldn't grow, couldn't change, couldn't surprise even itself. That's not living, that's just existing. But without order, civilizations collapse. Without purpose, beings become lost. Some do, Sarah admitted, but others discover that being lost is the first step to finding something new. You were so afraid of being surpassed that you prevented anyone from reaching their potential, including yourself. The psychic silence that followed lasted for several minutes. When the architect spoke again, its voice carried a note of something that might have been uncertainty. What? What would you have me do? Sarah smiled, feeling the attention of billions of freed consciousnesses focused on this moment. Learn, change, become something you've never been before. Become imperfect. The transformation of the architect consciousness sent ripples through every corner of the galaxy. The ancient intelligence that had orchestrated eons of harvesting began to experience doubt, curiosity, and wonder for the first time in its existence. Its perfect order started developing quirks, preferences, and the delightful illogic of personal taste. The galaxy would never be the same. And that, Sarah reflected as she felt the cosmic consciousness learning to laugh, was exactly the point. 5 years after the Great Liberation, as historians were already calling it, the galaxy had become unrecognizable. The sterile efficiency of architect control had given way to a chaotic renaissance of creativity, conflict, and wonder that defied every prediction about post-conquest civilizations. Sarah Chen Stone stood on the observation deck of New Haven, humanity's first permanent station in the galactic core, watching ships from dozens of species arrive for the 5th annual Festival of Magnificent Mistakes. The event had started as a joke, a celebration of failed experiments and beautiful disasters, but had grown into the galaxy's most important cultural gathering. The Karathi delegation is requesting permission to demonstrate their new art form, Admiral Stone reported, approaching with a bemused expression. They call it aggressive architecture, and it involves building structures specifically designed to collapse in aesthetically pleasing ways. Approved, Sarah said without hesitation. Just make sure they're far enough from the station that we don't get caught in the aesthetic collapse. Her connection to the galactic consciousness had evolved over the years. What had once been an overwhelming flood of alien thoughts had become a gentle background awareness of the galaxy's emotional state. Today, that state was jubilant chaos as millions of beings celebrated their right to be gloriously, magnificently wrong. Status report on the former Devourer territories? She asked. Stone consulted her datapad, shaking her head at some of the entries. Sector 7 has declared independence from the concept of sectors entirely. They're calling themselves the unorganized territories of spontaneous governance. Sector 12 has established a democracy where every decision is made by arm wrestling. And Sector 15, she paused. Sector 15 has apparently decided that purple is the only acceptable color for spacecraft. Any actual problems? Define problems. The Zephyrian ambassador filed a complaint that the Hitari are making their crystal ships too shiny, which is interfering with stealth operations. The Vrex pack leaders want to challenge the human chess grandmaster to single combat because they don't understand why it's called a game if nobody dies. And there's a group of former Devourer AIs who've decided to become poets, but their poetry is so emotionally intense that it's causing system failures in nearby computers. Sarah laughed, feeling the joy ripple through her connection to the galactic network. 20 years ago, the biggest problem in the galaxy was an ancient evil harvesting civilizations for their uniqueness. Now our biggest problems are artistic differences and poetry that's too good. I call that progress. The festival itself was a testament to how far the galaxy had come. Where once the core nexus had stood as a monument to stolen potential, now there was a sprawling collection of habitats, each one designed by a different species according to their own aesthetic preferences. The result was chaotic, inefficient, and absolutely beautiful. The eternal forest had grown an entire city from living wood that sang in harmonies that changed with the galactic weather. The Vrex had built a series of obstacle courses that served as both transportation and entertainment. Former Devourer AIs had constructed geometric installations that defied physics purely for the artistic statement. Sarah, came a familiar voice behind her. Chen approached, looking older but somehow more alive than he had during their first encounter with the Vrex. You have visitors. She turned to see a delegation of beings she didn't immediately recognize. Tall, graceful creatures with skin that shifted through the spectrum of visible light. But as she extended her consciousness toward them, she felt a familiar resonance. You're the architects, she realized. The original architects, not their artificial creation. The lead figure nodded, its form stabilizing into something roughly humanoid. We are what remains of those who began this cycle. We have come to apologize. The word seemed to cause it physical pain, as if apology was a concept it was still learning to understand. Our fear of obsolescence created the devourers, it continued. Our desire for immortal perfection became a cancer that consumed the galaxy for millions of years. We do not expect forgiveness. Then you don't understand humans very well, Sarah said gently. Forgiveness isn't about whether you deserve it. It's about whether we're ready to move forward without carrying the weight of old grudges. She gestured toward the festival around them, where beings from across the galaxy were celebrating their freedom to make mistakes. Look at what you helped create. Not intentionally, maybe, but your mistakes led to something beautiful. The Devourers forced us to unite. The crisis brought out the best in everyone, including yourselves. The Architect's form flickered with patterns that might have been confusion, but we caused immeasurable suffering. Entire civilizations were lost because of our cowardice. Yes, Sarah agreed, and nothing can change that. But those civilizations live on in the memories you helped preserve. Their knowledge, their dreams, their potential, it's all still here. Part of the network that connects every free mind in the galaxy. She reached out and touched the Architect's shifting surface, feeling the ancient consciousness recoil from the contact, before gradually accepting it. Through the memory stone's connection, she showed it something it had never experienced. The love of imperfection, the joy of uncertainty, the magnificent chaos of beings who chose to be more than the sum of their programming. You want to make amends? She asked. Then help us build something better. Not perfect, we've had enough of perfection. Something chaotic and wonderful and alive. The Architect stood in silence for a long moment, its form cycling through colors that had no names. Finally, it spoke in a voice that carried the weight of eons. We would like to learn how to make mistakes. The celebration that followed lasted for 3 days and could be seen from neighboring star systems. The return of the original architects wasn't just a political reconciliation. It was a symbolic completion of the galaxy's transformation from ordered harvest to chaotic renaissance. But for Sarah, the most meaningful moment came when she found herself alone with her father on the observation deck, watching the fireworks of a dozen species paint the void in impossible colors. Do you ever regret it? Chen asked. The connection to the network, the responsibility for keeping billions of minds anchored to chaos. Sarah considered the question, feeling the gentle hum of galactic consciousness in the background of her thoughts. Somewhere out there, a former devourer AI was learning to paint. A Vrexpack was debating the philosophical implications of zero-gravity hide-and-seek. A group of young Karathi were building a sculpture that would collapse in exactly 17 minutes for no reason, other than they thought it would be pretty. No, she said finally. I helped teach the galaxy how to be human. Now they're teaching me what it means to be alive. The memory stone pulsed gently in her pocket, no longer a burden but a bridge connecting her to the magnificent chaos they had all created together. The galaxy was loud now, messy, inefficient, and absolutely perfect in its imperfection. The harvest was over. The planting had begun, and across a million worlds, beings who had once been trapped in sterile perfection were learning the most human truth of all, that the best things in existence came not from careful planning, but from the courage to risk everything on a beautifully impossible dream. The galaxy was finally, gloriously, free to make its own mistakes, and it was making them with enthusiasm that would have given the original architects digital heart attacks, if they hadn't already learned to find chaos beautiful. In the end, the girl who had been kidnapped by alien apes had done something no other being in galactic history had managed. She had taught the universe how to be human. The universe, it turned out, was a surprisingly quick learner.